Greetings. Today we're going to talk about Chapter 7, Listening. So what is listening? We are going to define it as the active process of making meaning out of another person's spoken messages. So you can see here that the key words in this definition are making meaning. That is truly the definition of listening. As you can tell from the definition, listening is an active process. It's not just something that washes over us. It's not just the sounds that we hear. It's something active that we have to participate in, and it allows us to create meaning from what we hear. With listening, we're dealing with spoken messages. Granted, there are other things that we hear, but that's not what we're focusing on when we're talking about listening. And of course, listening is important in multiple aspects at work, at school, and in social and personal relationships. 3 misconceptions about listening. First, that hearing is the same as listening, and it's not. Hearing is the biological process, so it's the mechanics of what happens when sound waves enter your ear canal and bounce off all the little things in there, right? That's hearing. That's biological. That's not the same as listening. Listening is natural and effortless. Not at all. Hearing may be natural and effortless, but listening is a lot of work when you do it correctly in order to make that meaning. And the third misconception is that all listeners hear the same thing. Because listening is about making meaning, and because we make meaning in different ways, all listeners don't hear the same thing. Listeners hear things differently. So what are some ways that we listen? We engage in 3 types of listening: informational, critical, and empathic. In informational listening, we are listening to learn. So part of what you're doing right now is informational listening, listening to learn. When you are listening to your Garmin as you're driving, right? You're listening to learn which way to turn. That is informational listening. Critical listening is listening to evaluate. Now, hopefully you're also doing some of that here. You're not just taking in the information, but critically evaluating it. Also, you might think of that when it comes to the political commercials that come on in the fall, right? Listening to evaluate. You want to listen not just to what the candidates say, but really evaluate what they have to say and try to understand their positions. Finally, there's empathic listening. And empathic listening is listening to provide empathy and comfort. So when your friend's having a bad day and they're telling you about their day, that is empathic listening. Now, as you've probably discovered at some point in your life, we aren't really good at listening. So what are some of the barriers to effective listening? Well, one of the first ones is noise. And noise is anything that distracts you from listening. Now, that might be noise of things going on while you're trying to listen to this, but it also might be noise inside of you. It might be the fact that you're hungry, that you're tired, that you're worried about something, that you are anxious about something, that you're excited about something. All of those different aspects are parts of noise that can distract you from listening. Pseudo-listening is another barrier to listening, and that might be using feedback behaviors to give false impression that you're listening. So if someone is talking to you and you are going, and maybe nodding, but you really aren't paying attention to them. A lot of times this happens when we're pretending to listen to someone while we're on email or texting someone. That's pseudo-listening, and that's a big barrier to listening. Selective listening is listening to only the things that you want to hear. So you're not really hearing the whole picture. You're just listening for what you want to meet your expectations. And finally, information overload is a big piece of this. So having a huge amount of information that you feel that you've got to pay attention to. And that can be a big barrier to effective listening, which is why we try to keep these audios so short and why we break them into multiple sections. Glazing over is another big barrier to listening when we are kind of daydreaming when we should be listening. Now that differs from pseudo-listening because we're not giving those kind of behaviors to pretend we're listening. We just zone out, right? That's glazing over. And then rebuttal tendencies are the propensity to argue inwardly with the speaker. So as they're talking, you're sitting there arguing with them in your head without really listening to what they're having to say. So you miss some of what they're saying. Closed-mindedness is also a big barrier to listening, where you're refusing to even listen to any ideas that you disagree with. So again, this happens a lot when it comes to political campaigns, where people refuse to listen to the other side at all because they have a particular side that they are interested in. Finally, there's competitive interrupting. Basically, this is interrupting so that you can talk about what you want to talk about, and that's a control factor. So again, a big barrier to effective listening. So believe it or not, this is the only section for the listening chapter, and we'll see you on the next chapter. Thanks.